Hello and welcome to the CX Files for October 23rd, 2025. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, a very happy week before Halloween. I don't know about you, but I'm getting my decorations out. I'm getting a pumpkin, and I've even got an orange light here, as you can see. I know that this isn't a video podcast, but I'm showing Mark I've got this funky, cool Space 1999 retro light that really looks like it could be a jack-o'-lantern.
Wonderful, wonderful. I hope you need to put that in the window at the front of your house and make sure everybody can see the orange lights.
No, it looks like a lightsaber. I've turned it on. So, okay,
We
yes.
need to turn this into a video podcast. So all
No,
of
we
these
don't.
these
No, we
these
don't.
these
No.
interactions, we've definitely got faces for radio.
Yeah, listen, for everybody listening right now, when Mark and I started the video chat, that's how we record. We're seeing each other as we record. I asked him if he's growing a mustache, and he said no. I just didn't shave the last couple of days. And I'm sitting here in my gym outfit because I literally just came back from doing a boxing session. So, yeah, I think we can keep it audio only. That's for the benefit of everybody else who would be tuning in.
All right, absolutely. Well, why don't you introduce the interview for this week because it's one of yours, and I think it's a
Yeah.
local one as well, isn't it?
Well, it's about as local as you can get in Eastern Canada. It's with Joanne Morrison, who is the founder of Outmarket. Now, Joanne is based in Toronto, and I always like to joke with my friends in the Greater Toronto area. It's just down the road. In Canadian terms, it is. It's about a 6 hour drive. Canada's largest city. Actually, Mark, you might not know this, but I believe the fourth biggest metropolitan area in North America. And with that, Joanne has made Toronto her home for quite some time, and she's an expert in BPO marketing. I've known Joanne for well over a decade. She's somebody I have an infinite amount of respect for, given the work that she's done working for outsourcers in a marketing context, but also the work she's doing independently with her own consulting firm. Now, I caught up with Joanne in Montreal a few weeks ago. She was in town. We met up for breakfast. And one of the things that we were talking about was the major mistakes that outsourcing organizations are making from the context of how they're marketing themselves. And I said to Joanne, this would be an awesome podcast to put together. So we were able to get onto the microphones and have a little chat about what Joanne sees as the major mistakes coming down the pike in regards to what BPOs are doing in 2025 and what they might want to be thinking about going into 2026 as they hone their marketing strategies to be more effective. I'm not going to give any teasers in terms of what she talked about because I want people to listen because I think she has some incredibly sound advice. But all I can say is there are some elements that are quite obvious, and the BPOs just keep doing. But at the same time, Joanne gave me some real insight in terms of what marketeers within the outsourcing space need to be thinking about in order to be a little bit more innovative and to be a little bit more effective in what they do.
Yeah, and obviously we're about to roll the interview, so everyone can hear what Joanne had to say. I think that this area, though, is particularly interesting in the last couple of years for the way that AI has actually changed the way that BPOs need to create a sense of the information that's out there about what they can do and how it's published and where it's available. And Forrester did some very interesting research on this quite recently, looking at how do people put together shortlists of the BPOs they want to talk to, and quite often nowadays it's going to tools like ChatGPT and asking, who's the best provider for this type of service. So you need to think about your marketing strategy not just in terms of what is it that people are literally going to see and read and find out about your company, but you also need to make sure that information's training all these engines as well, because that's what people are
Yeah.
talking to.
There's a lot of different things that how marketing is playing out going into the new year. I really believe that there's going to need to be a mindset shift in terms of what companies or individuals running marketing departments do. It can't just be, well, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way. There's got to be some new ideas. There's got to be, I think, in many cases, some fresh blood that comes in and shakes things up and says there is a better way of doing things. And there's different priorities. There's different ways of positioning an organization. And I think you've just referenced a really interesting one in itself. But I think that Joanne best speaks for herself with her ideas and what she sees as some of the mistakes happening in the industry. So why don't we go to the interview with Joanne and find out a little bit more about where she thinks outsourcers and their marketing professionals need to be prioritizing going into 2026 and beyond. This week, the CX Files is excited to welcome a fellow Canadian, well, at least from my standpoint, being a Canadian, albeit in a different city just down the road. I'm in Montreal, but Joanne Morrison, our guest today, who is the founder of Outmarket, which is a marketing agency designed specifically to help the outsourced contact center players in the broader market. She's based in Toronto. Joanne, great to have you on the podcast. We've been talking about doing this for quite some time, and I'm really excited to have you join.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, anybody who knows Joanne will realize she has got an incredible pedigree in our space. Joanne, you and I think go back well over a decade just in terms of the work that you've done with different providers. You've struck out on your own and are doing some amazing work with some really innovative players. And the reason we've joined up today for our chat is just to talk a little bit about as we're finishing out 2025, and I still can't believe that we're saying we're finishing 2025. When the heck did that happen? Um, we're going to talk about some of the more common mistakes marketing wise that those in the CX services realm are committing right now. And when I think a little bit about what we witness at trade shows, when we see what we pick up on LinkedIn in our feeds, there's a lot of really cool things going on, but I don't necessarily know if the packaging and the messaging is going along with that. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, which we will talk about. We're going to touch on underinvestments and AI usage and all of that good stuff. But I think, the first point I'd like to make in terms of a very common marketing mistake that I see is really underinvestment in marketing. And I want to qualify this a little bit by saying we know that big budgets don't necessarily equal good marketing. And I will say I've worked in every type of environment, from big budget to no budget and everything in between. And I think it is possible to make gains on a small budget. But I think a lot of BPO leaders in the C-suite aren't aware that the benchmark marketing budget for B2B services firms is really 2 to 8% of annual gross revenue. And that's being conservative. Like I just read a Gartner report recently that surveyed companies and found that the average B2B marketing budget was more like 8.4% for B2B companies. So this is really what you're competing against. And I think despite the BPO industry having become massively competitive over the years, what I see happening is the typical BPO's marketing budget is really a fraction of that, much lower than 1% typically. And then execs wonder kind of why the needle isn't moving, or even if the needle is moving slightly, they're not giving the marketing team credit for the fact that they're having some small successes, despite the constraint of being massively underfunded. So I think in some cases, the leadership team may have the perception that the marketing team is underperforming when really the reality is the team is actually doing a pretty good job with what they have. So I think just being aware, first of all, of what's appropriate for a budget is very important. And then if leadership then makes a conscious decision to underspend, that's fine. They just need to be aware that that's what they're doing and then understand the consequences.
And I think that you're touching on something that's important here. It's the implications, understanding the implications of underfunding what these marketing resources can be. And if you're providing the amount of money that just to use an allusion here to something else, to eating out, to if you provide the resources to go eat at a fast food restaurant, you can't expect a Michelin 3-star experience.
Exactly. Yes, that's a great way to put it for sure.
So let me ask you then, what do you see as this chronic underfunding that we hear about in our space? And I agree with you. One of the refrains I hear constantly from outsourcing marketing professionals is that budgets these days just aren't what they used to be. And I've been hearing this for a few years now. What's going on?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's true. And I would argue that I don't know that budgets have ever been what they should be. And I think this is, you know, it goes back to historically what we've seen in the BPO industry. So I've been in this industry for uh, almost 20 years. Actually, it has been 20 years now that I think about it. Um, so kind of a grizzled veteran. And I remember when I started, like way back in 2005, BPOs really didn't have true marketers. There was no expectation that marketing was going to do lead gen. That was considered the purview of the sales team. So what you had instead was a quote unquote marketing team that was really just some proposal managers that were responding to RFPs. Maybe we were working with an agency to, make sure the website was maintained. And, maybe you had, one or two people just doing recruitment marketing for employees. And so that was really it. And, it wasn't nearly as competitive as it is now. And, the salespeople, back then, in some cases, were kind of order takers, right? So the need for marketers to be lead generators wasn't necessarily there. I mean, now, as we know, the industry is just so hyper competitive. It's pretty saturated right now. So it's even more important that marketing budget get increased if you are having the expectation that your marketers are going to be lead generators. Like it just opens up so many different areas. So I think that history is part of the underfunding problem because they're not used to spending that kind of money. They don't necessarily recognize that things have changed.
There's also something too, Joanne, that I think is very important to mention. If you don't have the right resources in place, you're not going to get the right people. And somebody that can think strategically like you do with a marketing function and what can be done, how best to communicate, what the best channels are, what the messaging should be. This is a very crucial aspect or tool that you should be able to leverage when you're in a hyper competitive market like we're in currently.
Right, absolutely. I mean, you need to set your people up for success. Yeah, there's just no other way to say it for sure.
So let's dive into what you see as another one of the key mistakes that's going on right now in the sector. What else comes to mind when you think about what marketing departments could be doing better?
Well, another thing that I see often is a focus on too few activities. So, I mean, I think sometimes intuitively this makes sense that we want to go really deep on a small number of activities, do them really well. Um, but the reality is that in marketing, we are rarely 100% confident that an initiative is going to yield fruit because, I mean, this is part of the joy and the frustration of marketing for me is that it's so dynamic. Everything's changing all the time. So even if a tactic worked really well in the past, doesn't necessarily mean, it's going to work again. So at the end of the year, if none of those three activities that you chose to go all in on are successful, that's really how marketing leaders lose their jobs, unfortunately. So I think the somewhat counterintuitive approach that I've seen work better is to just get really aggressive, get the team working on many initiatives, even if you're just skimming the surface on some of them and not necessarily doing everything to perfection. But I think dipping your toe into several activities can allow you to then identify which areas seem to have more potential, and then you can go deeper on those things. And that's kind of a much better way to ensure that the marketing team has some success stories to tell at the end of the year.
Can you give some examples of what some of these, say, three big Super Bowl type like initiatives might be that, as you say, could all three very easily fall flat? What are you seeing that marketing departments are guilty of going all in on these days?
Well, I mean, it may be this question kind of dovetails into what I was going to talk about next, which is events. So, this is another area where, I sometimes see some struggles in the sense that I think most BPOs recognize the importance of in-person events. We know they're a critical marketing tool. We know this is a trust-based business, and we're talking about multi-million-dollar deals. And sometimes the buyer of BPO services, they're putting their job and reputation at risk when they choose you. So like they've got to really feel like you're the right fit. But what I see happening sometimes is the marketing team will spend so much time preparing for the event, so many sleepless nights executing, just making sure everything is running smoothly. But then when it comes to the post-event follow-up, they're not necessarily always on top of things. And so it's kind of like running a marathon and then you just stop when you get 5 meters from the finish line. So what I always advise companies to do is just really put as much, if not more time into that post-event follow-up as you do for the prep. Because that's the only way that you're going to fully realize the benefits of your investment. So that means just simple things like just really making sure that when you get the attendee list from the event, someone on the team's cleansing that list, removing all the competitors, all the people you don't want to talk to, categorizing companies by industry, validating the email addresses so you've got a clean list when you upload it to your CRM, and getting those post-event email campaigns queued up ahead of time, and doing your debrief with the event attendees and making sure that happens quickly, and then making sure that all the leads are followed up on immediately. And then along with that, you also want to remove all those silos as well between sales and marketing. So everybody's rowing in the same direction, and, sales knows what its task is and marketing knows what it's doing, and then documenting everything in the CRM. And then the other example I can give to just sort of add some color is I worked with one BPO where there were a couple of events that the sales and account management team really loved. And anecdotally, they would say, we love these events. They're great. We have to do them. We have to invest. And the company was making really big investments in these two particular events. But when we actually dove in and we looked at the results and the hard data over the past few years, we realized that maybe those events worked well in the past when the company was open to accepting smaller FTE deals from a very specific industry, but things had changed at the organization, strategy had changed. The company was no longer pursuing those types of deals. And it just wasn't the right mix for the type of new business that the company wanted. And so marketing, when we proposed defunding those events, we got a lot of pushback from others in the organization. In some cases, they had an emotional attachment to them. And, they said, well, our current clients are there, so we need to be there. But once we had that conversation, we decided, well, the company can still sponsor them. We're just going to scale down the investment and we're going to treat them differently. And we're going to recognize them for what they are, which was really client appreciation events. And ultimately, we ended up moving that budget allocation from marketing to account management just to reflect that. So, that's really why we need the hard data to kind of inform our decision making rather than, the anecdotal success stories, if you will.
But I'm really glad that you did take the chance to dovetail into the events category, because I think there's a lot of mistakes that are made in terms of events, how events are managed. And you've touched on some of the examples, but I think it's probably more challenging for individuals on the marketing teams and the different BPOs right now because of the fact that there are just so many of these events. And if you talk to the organizers, well, their event is the one that you have to be at. And if you don't attend, then you're going to miss out on all these opportunities, and the end of the world is nigh and the sky's going to fall. The challenge that somebody who's working as a marketing professional or a decision maker in a marketing function for a BPO has in regards to navigating what the labyrinth of these different trade shows and conferences are in 2025, really since I'd say since the end of the pandemic, has been really tough. I mean, Joanne, you know as well as I do that as a BPO professional, we could be at a different trade show every week, probably between Western Europe and North America for most of the
Oh,
year.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And I think, the events that I have seen, more success at are the ones that have a community behind them. But again, I, have to kind of educate some of the BPO leaders that I work with that it's not necessarily a one and done, right? Like if you're going to become part of the community, you kind of have to commit to doing a couple of the same events. And there's no issue with maybe just attending, first, just to kind of get the lay of the land and then making an investment sponsorship decision from there. But yeah, I think, just the events that really foster a sense of community, I think those are the ones that often yield more fruit than, some of the bigger, more anonymous ones, people.
Yeah, and on this podcast, I've had guests on previously who've talked a little bit about how difficult it is to navigate the events when you're at them. They've just gotten so large, and you talked a little bit about success metrics when you're done. I know some people just literally count up how many business cards they've collected over the course of a 2 to 3 day trade show, and they don't do anything with them, but they almost have the stack on their desk, and it's seen like a badge of honor. That's the first step. The next step is to actually contact these people and find out
Right.
exactly who would like to do business with you.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I'm guilty of that too. And let's
We
face
all
it,
are.
like you go to these events all the time. It's exhausting. By the time
Mhm.
you get back, you're usually tired. But I think doing a lot of kind of advanced prep beforehand. So, I mean, sometimes you can get the attendee list ahead of time, sometimes you can't, but even just making your own efforts to try and figure out who's going to be there ahead of time, just advertising that you're going to be there, inviting people to kind of contact you if they're going to be there. Trying to set up meetings ahead of time. I think that's really important as well, so that you don't just kind of get there and you're sort of overwhelmed. You've kind of identified exactly who you want to talk to before you go. I think that's really important.
So, what else would you put on your list of mistakes going on right now, Joanne, from a marketing perspective in the BPO sector?
Well, I think another thing, and I mean this could relate to events as well, because as well as anyone, you go to these events, everyone's oftentimes doing the same thing. Everybody kind of looks the same. The messaging is very similar. So I think risk taking, giving your employees the freedom to fail, I think is really important. Sometimes it's a challenge to do something risky when it comes to an event, for example, because the investment is so large. But I heard the entrepreneur Stephen Bartlett talk recently about adding a chief failure officer to his team. So this is a person whose sole job it is to recommend kind of high risk solutions to problems. So I think that's really interesting because, I think the BPO industry is generally pretty conservative, but the companies that can kind of break through a little bit and do something a little bit different tend to get noticed and have more success. But the first step in that is creating a culture where, we encourage employees to not let the possibility of failure hold them back from trying new things. But the key is to fail fast and move on. If something isn't working, you don't need to double down and triple down, just move on. I mean, I can give another example to kind of illustrate this from outside of the industry. So I remember my very first job right out of school was at a psychological test publishing company. I was a research assistant, and part of my role was to do the initial review of all the test idea submissions and then make the recommendations about which ones we should move forward with in the publication process. And my boss was a statistician with a PhD. And I remember one year I very proudly told him we were doing a great job at selecting the right test to publish because 100% of our selections made money. And he said, well, that's a problem. And I was like, well, what do you mean that's a problem? He said, well, if 100% of these projects are successful, it means statistically we're passing on other things that could also be making money. And he said, I want to see a higher failure rate because then that will tell us that we're casting a wide enough net. So that always stuck with me. And I think it's a really good reminder that, there are successes we may be leaving on the table when we don't apply enough risk and increase our tolerance for failure.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that philosophy before, but I think you're touching on something. Okay, we've got time for one last one. What's it going to be?
All right. Well, I think this is the one that's on everyone's mind right now, which is the big, hairy topic of AI. So in terms of the marketing mistake that I see, I think many execs and marketing folks think AI is just ChatGPT, and all it's good for is writing content, social media posts. And I'd argue, I mean, this is like the laziest way to use it. We know, as we've talked about, marketing is about differentiation. So if every company's using the same tool and everyone sounds the same, we know that's not going to be effective. So if you are going to use it to create content, I think you need someone very experienced to be directing the prompts up front and then reviewing everything to add the right level of depth. And, I instruct my team to use AI as much as possible, but I always tell them, like, use it, but I don't ever want to know that you used it. So if you're giving me something that's obviously AI, we're going to have a problem. But where I think AI has some much better applicability for marketing is really on the back end of things, like creating structures and wireframes or vibe coding websites or doing research. Because, then rather than using it to cut staff, like you're really using it as leverage to improve your speed and velocity. And I would recommend that every company should have at least one person on their marketing team or someone at the agency level who's in charge of identifying marketing use cases for AI and spending the hours that it might take to create the prompts that are going to get you the results that you want. And don't just limit your AI use to ChatGPT. So personally, I like using the platform Perplexity because, the paid version will give you access to several different tools, including ChatGPT 5, Claude, Grok, Gemini, and then depending on what you ask, it'll adjust and kind of use the tool that's the best fit. But, for example, I used AI recently to create a wireframe for some website pages I was working on. And I will tell you, it was effort because it took about an hour for me to land on the right prompts in order to get what I wanted. But for me, that hour was well spent because it would have taken me a whole day to teach myself how to use a wireframe tool. And also for vibe coding, like I don't know how to code, but I've been able to use AI to build some really cool lead gen tools. You can ask it to create HTML code for any web-based tool or website you want to create and then modify it however you like. But again, it requires thinking and effort and time. But I think using AI really creatively behind the scenes is really where it's much more useful than just, cranking out one more blog post that is too generic.
Okay, well, Joanne, thank you very much. Always great to catch up. And as I say, you and I have known each other quite some time, and I think that our career path in BPO roughly has the same timeline, but we've never talked nuts and bolts of marketing like we have today. So I really appreciate the thoughts that you've been able to share. Last question for you is if any of our listeners want to find you or to get in touch, how can they do so?
Yeah, you can go to my website, which is outmarketbpo.com and connect with me there or LinkedIn or email Joanne at outmarketbpo.com.
Thanks very much. We'll look forward to having you back on the podcast soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.